Good morning, members Garrett and Bollendroff, staff and guests. The lobbies are open and the recording has begun.
Thank you, Gretchen. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Board Caucus meeting for Tuesday, November 26, 2024. We have a presentation from the LCB research team on cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, and I'm going to turn it over directly to Nick Gladowski, who is our research analyst from the research team. So Nick, take it away.
Right, I'll just share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep, we can see it.
Great. Well, good morning, board members Garrett and Bollendroff. I'm here to present the results of a new data brief on behalf of the LCB research program on cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. This data brief is the result of a request made by...
Excuse me, Nick?
Yeah.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
Oh, yeah, I can speak a little louder. My mic's been having some issues this week for some reason. Is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So this data brief is the result of a request made by board member Bollendroff to learn more about the subject, and it's already posted online under the research program's Research and Data Briefs webpage. So cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, or CHS, has been receiving increased attention and notably was recently mentioned in a New York Times article about harms associated with frequent or heavy cannabis use. Some results indicate that CHS is occurring more often, although it's unclear whether this increase is due to more frequent cannabis use, to increases in THC concentrations in cannabis products, or simply due to increased recognition of the syndrome by medical professionals. CHS is characterized by intense nausea, abdominal pain, and cyclical vomiting following a long-term period of frequent cannabis use. It's typically diagnosed in individuals with prolonged cannabis use prior to onset, who have experienced 3 or more episodes of nausea, pain, and vomiting, and the symptoms then disappear after cannabis cessation. However, CHS is difficult for medical providers to diagnose because it's not a commonly known syndrome and because THC is typically antiemetic, meaning that it usually reduces nausea and vomiting. This can lead to extensive and expensive medical investigations in search of a cause. And furthermore, the exact mechanism causing CHS is still unknown, particularly as it has been detected in those who have been using cannabis for as little as 6 months or as long as 11 years. While very rare, fatalities have also been reported due to electrolyte disturbances caused by chronic vomiting. There are no standard treatments for CHS, although benzodiazepines, haloperidol, and topical capsaicin can be helpful for short-term symptom relief. And notably, hot showers or baths are very frequently reported to offer temporary relief from symptoms, with some patients only going to the hospital after they've run out of hot water. The only known long-term treatment for CHS is to stop using cannabis, and there's some research that shows that those who have experienced CHS once are more likely to experience it again. LCB has been receiving questions about CHS, although research on the topic is fairly limited as the disorder is somewhat uncommon. So to better understand reports of CHS in Washington, we analyzed data from the International Cannabis Policy Study on this syndrome. ICPS is an international research collaboration that conducts annual surveys on cannabis policy and public health. LCB supports this research, and ICBS conducts representative samples of Washington's population so that all results are based on the sex, age, and race makeup of Washington state. The 2023 ICPS survey asked participants 2 questions about CHS. The first was, have you ever experienced cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which is repeated severe vomiting from marijuana use? And if the participant answered yes, they were then asked, did you experience cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome in the last 12 months? The research program used these results to examine the prevalence of CHS in Washington state, as well as to explore potential risk factors in this sample. The results that I'll talk about included over 1,100 participants who reported past year cannabis use. To examine risk factors associated with CHS, I used a binary logistic regression analysis, which looks at different factors to predict the likelihood of a specific outcome, in this case, that an individual experienced CHS in the past 12 months. I examined whether sex, age, medical versus non-medical cannabis use of legal versus illegal cannabis, types of cannabis products, and frequency of cannabis use to determine whether these variables predicted the likelihood of experiencing CHS in the past year. Of this Washington sample, about 6% or 67 past year cannabis users reported experiencing CHS in the past year. And this is similar to rough estimates of US prevalence rates at about 5%. When examining potential risk factors, we found that males were more likely to report past year CHS than females, where 81% of those who reported past year CHS were male. And we also found that younger individuals were more likely to report CHS than older individuals, where the age group that most commonly reported past year CHS were those 21 to 25, and the mean age overall was 34. These findings that young people, particularly young males, are at higher risk for CHS is consistent with past research. So this and similar prevalence rates across the US provide further confidence in these risk factors. But moving on, I also examined some other potential risk factors that hadn't yet been examined in the literature. We also found that those who reported using cannabis for only medical purposes were more likely to report CHS than those who used for either only non-medical purposes or for both medical and non-medical purposes. This is a novel finding and somewhat surprising, although prior research has shown that medical cannabis users may be using for more serious health conditions relative to those who use for non-medical only or for both non-medical and medical reasons. Therefore, it could be that these individuals have higher risk of CHS given the medical conditions that they're using cannabis for. We also found that those who reported using any amount of illegal cannabis were more likely to report experiencing CHS than those who used cannabis from only legal sources, where 76% of those who experienced CHS reported that they had used at least some cannabis from an illegal source. This is another interesting finding, and it could be that we're seeing that legal cannabis is safer to use given that it's regulated and there's required testing for things like contaminants. Or it's possible that those who choose to use cannabis from outside the legal market may have other characteristics that just make them more likely to experience CHS. But either way, this finding could help to encourage cannabis users to shop within the legal market. Finally, we examined the individual effects of different types of cannabis products. Out of the 9 product categories used by ICPS, the only ones that predicted increased likelihood of reporting CHS were more frequent use of vape oils and liquids, concentrates, and edibles. None of the other product types, most notably flower, predicted increased risk in this sample. This finding is consistent with other literature suggesting that manufactured cannabis products, and often those that have higher THC concentrations, may have higher risk relative to more traditional forms of cannabis like flower. For example, there's a strong association between frequent use of concentrates and cannabis use disorder. Therefore, this adds to the literature that these heavily processed products may have more adverse outcomes and that cannabis flower could be a safer alternative. So some quick conclusions. Using ICPS data, we found that CHS prevalence in Washington is similar to nationwide estimates. We also identified some risk factors that are consistent with prior research, particularly risk for young males. Although we also identified other more novel potential risk factors, including the use of cannabis from illegal sources, medical compared to non-medical use, and the use of certain types of cannabis products. Notably, though, was that cannabis use frequency is commonly identified in the literature as a risk factor for CHS. In our analyses, cannabis use frequency was initially significant, but when it was the only predictor in the model. It was no longer significant when other variables were added to the model, particularly those for sex and cannabis used from illegal sources. So this could suggest that these other factors of sex and cannabis used from illegal sources may play a more important role or may co-occur with cannabis use frequency in the development of CHS. However, this and the other results I've presented should be interpreted with caution as they are based on self-report information, not medical diagnoses, and rates of CHS were low, with relatively few participants reporting past year CHS in the present sample, so more research on the topic is needed. We recently presented these findings at the CANRA Medical Cannabis Subcommittee meeting, and we're seeing if there are other states interested in collaborating to see if these findings hold when broadening the sample or comparing between states.
Oh, good.
And there are more technical descriptions of the statistical methods and the results that are available in the data brief, which is posted on the research program website under research and data briefs. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nick. Good. And going back to your comment about the Canada, did you get any other states that were interested in further collaboration or conversation around CHS?
Nobody's reached out yet.
Okay. Did you guys have so this is great, and I think a couple of things that stand out to me. One is this is rare. This is not something that we're seeing all over the place. It's not prevalent, but it is impacting a small subset of the population. So I think it is important that we keep this in front of us, and we continue to monitor this and look at future research. Did you have an opportunity in your development of this research brief to talk to anybody locally and hear locally what we might be seeing in hospital emergency rooms or from others locally who are frontline clinicians?
No, we haven't spoken to any individuals who have experienced it or who work for hospitals. I did reach out to the Washington Poison Control Center, but they don't specifically track cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome.
Okay. Well, one thing that I think would be interesting would be as a follow-up, because I appreciate the comment that further research is needed, but I would also like to hear from individuals in our state who are either have been impacted themselves, clinicians or emergency room physicians, and maybe others that we can identify. So maybe we can have a follow-up conversation at some point to talk about putting together a panel of some kind to come and talk to us from a perspective of a clinician, family, policymaker, perhaps, or whatever makeup of the panel. I think would be super interesting.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. Yeah.
Board Member Garrett, I can't see if you happen to have your hand raised. Just want to make sure that I don't miss any comments or questions that you may have.
No comments or questions.
Great, thank you. All right, anything else to add this morning? All right, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so next on the agenda, we have any board member or executive assistant reports. Board Member Garrett, anything? Gretchen, anything?
No, thank you.
All right. Well, I think that we have covered our agenda, and that concludes this board meeting caucus. Thank you.